Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds YouTube page. I'm Garrett Price, and I am super excited about this episode that we have going on today. I've got my guy at DBroFFB, Derek Brown here from Fantasy Pros. Derek, how you doing, man?
Doing good, Garrett, man. When you reached out about doing this, I was excited, man, because I love, and we don't get this a whole lot now in the space, I love having festive debates with people that have taken the time, watched the film, looked through everything, and really done their homework on them, all these players. But the thing about it is, and when we talk about this, Garrett, is a debate, not just, I love this guy, you hate this guy. Wah! Like, I like debates. We can all walk away with these things with civil conversations, and you just don't see that as much these days. So it's nice to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
You're 100% right. It's one of two things. It's either you're an idiot, you suck, you don't know what you're talking about.
It's all clickbait.
Exactly. Or the complete opposite. Oh, man, like they're just gassing you. They love it. You're the smartest guy ever. And it's an echo chamber because everybody's repeating the same stuff over and over and over and over. So yeah, it is fun to have a little bit of a difference on looking at these guys and how we view them, and especially in a wide receiver class. We were talking a little bit beforehand. A wide receiver class is just so good. You know, overall, it's a really talented class. There's a lot of great profiles overall, and then there's ones where some of the profile looks awesome and the other part of the profile is really questionable, and you have to kind of figure out where you land on certain prospects. So overall, how do you feel about the class in general?
I mean, I love the class, which is not a crazy take. Everybody talks about how much they love this class. I do think that this class is one that where you're going to have to lean on your process and have conviction about it, because after those top three wide receivers, it's your ranks are everywhere. You'll see some people have, I mean, everybody's wide receiver 4 and 5 is very different in this class. And that kind of trickles down to everybody else. Like the top 12s of this class, like everybody's ranks wide receiver 4 to 12 is extremely different. So I think this is a very interesting class with a lot of guys with a lot of different skill sets. And so some of this comes down to, I mean, for some people, it's pick your poison, you know, or do you like a certain archetype of wide receiver? Are you lower on this guy because of this, because of analytics, because of film, because his testing, whatever. You know, so I love this class in that I think we're going to get a lot of gems out of this class. I think there's going to be a lot of guys that were, the way they were used in college is not necessarily how they're going to be used in the NFL. So I love this class, man. But I do think that this is going to be a very interesting class just from the standpoint that a lot of processes, probably both yours and mine included in that, will be tested by this class. Which guys succeed, which guys don't meet our expectations in the NFL, and where do we go back to the drawing board for next year's class and say, okay, look, NIL, early declares, people holding out, people staying in, analytics, film, what do I need to do to tinker with my process going into next year's class? But I think those questions are going to be there for everybody after we see what this class does in the rookie seasons.
Absolutely. Now, for you, what would you say your slant is as far as when you kind of make a determination on a player? I think in today's day and age, we all try to at least use a little bit of the different tactics. If you're only using one tactic, you're missing out. But everyone kind of has a wheelhouse. So, you know, for me, I'm more of a film guy. Played college football, really enjoyed film, always dug into that. So that's a bigger part of my process than maybe some other people. What about for you? What would you say is kind of your wheelhouse, and what kind of breaks those ties for you and that kind of stuff?
For me, it comes down to, I try to blend everything together. Like I've done certain, you know, scouting academy work, things like that to try to, you know, improve my ability to watch film, to know what I'm watching, as well as, and there's still a lot of growth in that area that I still have to make, you know, but I think for me, it's blending the analytics and the film together and trying to paint the most complete picture about a player that I possibly can. Because, like you talked about, Garrett, like none of these things all in its own silo can tell the perfect picture about a player. And whether that comes down to, because when we're talking about receivers, their play is not just independent of everything else on the field. It comes down to when you're watching film, do you have context? Are you watching all 22? Are you just watching highlights and cut-ups? It's a totally different conversation to have when somebody's like, oh man, look at this play. You know, he's down the field, he busts for a 60-yard completion. And it's like, oh my God, this kid is awesome. And it's like, well, when you really go back and you watch the all 22, was it a blown coverage? Did the cornerback freaking fall down? Like, what is the context of that play? And you're not taking away things from the wide receiver, but you are going to have to bake that into how you're evaluating it. Was that rep won by the wide receiver, or was it just a bad rep by the corner? So trying to take all of these things and mash it together into painting a complete picture about a player is the way that I attack it.
Love it. Absolutely. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes then of this this video here. Let's start off with Troy Franklin. So Troy Franklin, and it's interesting because I think in ADP, I think Adonai Mitchell and Troy Franklin are back to back. So it's interesting because I know you have one drastically ahead of the other, and I have the opposite one drastically ahead of the other. So this is fascinating, and I think it's going to be really fun. So Troy Franklin, paint a picture for me, because I'm somebody that's not quite as high on Troy Franklin as other people. There's things that I'm not seeing or I have questions about in watching him and seeing him play. So paint a picture for me as to why you like Troy Franklin quite a bit, and where do you have him ranked pre-draft?
Right now, I've got, and just to throw this out, I've got Troy Franklin as my wide receiver 4. And I know that's not the case for a lot of people, but he is my wide receiver 4. And just starting from the analytics portion of it, he checks a lot of boxes from the analytics profile. Last year, amongst all FBS wide receivers, at least 50 targets. We're talking about a wide receiver that was 6th in yards per route run, 15 the PFF receiving grade. So even before I turn on the film, I'm like, okay, check. Those boxes are checked for me. But once you turn on the film for me, I think that a lot of parts or pieces of his game are underrated. Everybody looks at the speed and everybody talks about his ability as a deep threat. The first thing that jumped out to me when I watched his film was I think he is a way better route runner than people give him credit for. The nuance and the differentiation and the pacing in his routes. You'll see times where he comes off the line, and whether this is short intermediate or he's building up guys on a go route or a deep post and stuff, he'll bust off the line with exaggerated steps and then all of a sudden hit the gas and he's 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. So it's like, I get the testing stuff and people, maybe he didn't check the boxes for them. On the film, he checks the box emphatically for that. Like, I don't care about any freaking gauntlet drill. What I care about is going back to the film, and I'm watching him dust corners, whether it's route running, whether it's the speed, whether it's just the subtle things. Because, Garrett, I know you probably stand with me on this. I love it when I watch wide receiver film, and you're seeing these guys. It's a chess match every single rep. And how are they setting up corners both off the line and also in their routes, like head fakes, pacing, whether it's all those different things, or leverage. Are they leaning into corners before they break on an out route? Like, are they rounding off the top of the routes? Are they explosive in and out of their breaks? And I think Troy Franklin's route running gets slept on big time in this class. Like, everybody discusses him as a field stretcher. Everybody talks about what he does in the deeper quadrants of the field. I mean, for me, I think he's a complete guy. I see, and I don't know if you want to get into Troy Franklin's film, and then we kind of talk about, because there are holes in his game or areas where he needs to improve too. So I'll kick this back to you. What did you see off of Troy Franklin?
So when it comes to the tape for Troy Franklin, I think this was the biggest thing, because overall, I think his profile is pretty decent. You know, he's a guy that he only played 3 years in college, so early declare. He's got good age, so he's not. We have some guys in this class that are 24 years old coming out. He's not a guy that was in college forever. So I think that there's a lot of things on that side of his profile that I liked. But some of the things in his tape, I'll agree to a certain extent with the routes. But it seemed like there were certain routes that he ran much better than other routes. Specifically, it was some of the more flat routes I think he struggled with more so than slants, goes, things like that, where he could really utilize his speed a little bit more. But the thing that I struggled with is I was watching his tape, and I knew he was fast. And I remember him running the 40. And I was like, I'm pretty sure he ran a pretty good 40. And I saw him beating corners deep. So I was like, that matches up. But there's something when he's running, specifically some of those in routes and those out breaking routes, that the explosiveness doesn't seem to be there in the same way that it does on his long speed. And so I was trying to figure out what was missing there. Am I seeing something wrong? Was there an injury that maybe I didn't see? Was there, like, what was it? And so I went back and I looked at the 40 and I was like, no, the 40 was really solid. It was a low 4.4s. Like, he's fast. There's no denying that. And so I was like, oh, maybe it's just me. Then I saw the 10-yard split. And the 10-yard split is what did it for me. He had the slowest 10-yard split in the class. And I think that's a little bit of a red flag for me, in the sense of, we want these receivers to be able to operate well in short areas. And if you don't have the same level of burst as, even some of these bigger, slow, lumbering receivers, you don't have that same acceleration. That is a little bit of a concern for me. The other thing is, I think he is more of a he does profile as more of that Z receiver that is more of the take the top off, big plays, which is awesome. And it's especially great in best ball. But in most dynasty leagues, those guys can be tricky at times because you don't really know when to start them, especially in the days of cover two. We've got two safeties. Those big plays are covered up a lot more than maybe they were a few years ago. And we're seeing Pat Mahomes have to, dink and dunk a lot more than he used to. A lot of these other quarterbacks having to take a lot more underneath stuff. So these big play guys, while it's always good to have that in your bag, if that's the go-to, that can be a little tough. And I don't see as much of, while I think his hands are pretty solid, I don't see as much of the contested catch, the physicality. He's a little underweight. That possession, even though he's got the height for it, he doesn't have that same ability to be a possession guy. So I worry in some of those PPR aspects that he might be a little deficient there.
Yeah, and I definitely can agree with a lot of that. I think that if you're looking at Troy Franklin's profile, do I ever see him becoming a wide receiver one? Like just a ballyhoo 25-27% target share, wide receiver one. I don't see that in his range of outcomes. For me, he's a guy that could be, now for me, in the top range of his outcomes, can he be a 22% target share guy? I think he can get there. But living in the 20 to 22%, like the low 20s, I think is attainable for him. I love the fact that you brought up, because yes, the NFL has gone to more zone coverage. Almost every team in the NFL runs zone at least like a 60% clip, a lot of too high. So the ability to beat corners underneath and do something with the ball in your hands, and that's another part of his game where I do think that he can create plays with yak. Now, is he going to be a tackle breaker? No. Can he have issues at the catch point? Yes. And with the physicality and stuff, because the weight concerns and stuff like that, they're real. They're real. You can't run away from those. You can't just bury your head in the sand and pretend like they don't exist, because they do. But with Troy Franklin, I do think the route running and the immediate speed and the 10-yard split is a concern. It's a worry. I will say, and Garrett, you and I have done this long enough that we've seen enough to where testing, it matters until it doesn't. And one of the things that I'll say is, as far as, I care so much about testing with certain positions. Like tight ends, you have to be an elite athlete to be an elite tight end in the NFL. It's just a fact. You're not going to see guys out there running high 4.7s, testing like somebody that's working at the local 7-Eleven. Like that doesn't work. So looking at certain positions, wide receiver, if I'm going to take like the skill guys, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, wide receiver, it's not that I fade the testing altogether, but you know as well as I do that there is also a component of where like we need baseline speed and attributes, and then it comes down to what type of route runner are you? Can you set up corners? What is your separation ability? And with those types of things, because the NFL is littered. Like, we could pull up the top end of depth charts and talk about Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Hopkins, all these different guys, T. Higgins when he came out and people shaded him for his testing, and talk about guys that have won in the NFL, and then it's like, oh, we don't really care about the testing because he proved it on the field. So I'll mention that, but it's a good point to note that with the 10-yard split for Troy Franklin, for a player that is talked about, and the first thing that everybody brings up is the speed, it is definitely a point of interest and something to sit here and earmark, because if he, I'm not going to say fails, but if he disappoints as far as his career arc in the NFL, we are going to point back to that 10-yard split.
Yeah, and it was a weird one for me, because normally when I go and watch tape, I'm not directly going back to the testing numbers, because it's only if something feels off to me. I'm like, why is that? And sometimes it's you. Sometimes, you're a little gassy that day and you're just feeling a little off, and you're grouchy about everything, and, whatever. Like,
Yep.
it is a subjective process. So sometimes it's you. And so sometimes with guys like that, I like to go back a couple days later and watch another game or two and see, like, was it me, or was something going on, or what's happening? So yeah, it's definitely not that Troy Franklin he's a bad player. He's a bad receiver.
Oh, great.
I don't want him. He's terrible. But it is tough in a class. You mentioned it before. When you have 4 through 15 that are all guys that we think are going to get day 1 or day 2 capital. We think they're all pretty solid athletes. Some have better production profiles than others. You start nitpicking, and you got to find what.
Well, you got to pick your flavor, man. Like, you're at the ice cream shop. You got to go in there and pick your flavor and pick which players that you like. Like, we have to formulate rankings, and to a certain extent, you got to make stands. And I think this is a really interesting and awesome class to do that. It's like, whatever players you like, order like these 10, 12 receivers in whatever order you like, and whatever, is important to you in your process. So I love this class for that aspect. And the one thing to put a bow on Troy Franklin, though, we kind of mentioned, but we didn't talk about in depth, and you brought it up, the drops. Like, he had 9 drops in 2023, and some of those were the concentration type. Some of that was some ball tracking stuff. So there is stuff there to where it's also, even if you look at Troy Franklin, you say, okay, he's a Z receiver, put him with a good quarterback, a big arm quarterback. Like, if he lands in our latest mock right now, that we're dropping this episode probably Friday or Saturday for Fantasy Pros, we have a 3-round mock coming out. I put Troy Franklin going to the Commanders. Put him with, if Jane Daniels lands there, or Drake May, somebody with a fantastic deep ball, we're wheels up, baby. Like, that's great. But if you put him in a spot where maybe the quarterback's a little bit less inclined to go deep, and we're not seeing that often, is Troy Franklin going to pay off on my wide receiver 4 ranking for him? Probably not.
And that is the hardest part about some of the pre-draft rankings, is you have certain players, great example. We're not going to talk about him really here, but Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman is a very polarizing player. I'm very concerned about him overall, but
me too.
I'm a lot less concerned if it's a team that's going to say, hey, we see this guy as a big slot. Okay, now the separation stuff doesn't bother me as much, because he can body, nickel backs and guys like that.
Well, even the route running wouldn't be that big of a problem, because then you're just asking him to run to space versus off coverage if we're going like big slot territory too.
Exactly. So, then he's got to catch balls over the middle, which he's got good hands and he's got good play strength. So we're good. You ask him to play the X, I'm terrified. I'm terrified of him playing the X at the NFL level. So there's things that we can only guess so much before the draft until we know where they go, to what quarterback, to what team, to what offense, and where they're going to play that guy. So, it is a little bit of a guessing game. So let's switch. Let's flip. So we go from your wide receiver 4 to my wide receiver 4. And I'll be honest, this guy's my wide receiver 4, and it terrifies me. It scares the tar out of me. It really
Things
does.
are puckering, huh, Garrett?
Oh, man. We are clenched over here. But
you making pearls, baby.
but here's the thing. The production profile is going to be the biggest thing against Adonai Mitchell, and it's justified. His production profile is doo-doo good. It is.
Oh, it's bad.
It's not a good production profile.
It's not good.
It's not. But here's what I saw. And this is kind of, me playing my cards a little bit. I talked earlier that tape is a big thing for me. That's going to weigh, especially in the pre-draft process, that's going to weigh more heavily than anything else is going to in my pre-draft process. We'll see, if he gets drafted, first round of the Bills. Okay, the NFL tells me they're seeing something similar to what I'm seeing. If he falls to the end of the second round and it's not a good spot, okay, now I'm terrified again. So, but let me go back to his tape. Adonai Mitchell, when I went to go watch him, traditionally, I'm not anti-big receivers. There's plenty of big receivers that I love. But over the past couple years, with all my hits and all my misses, two of the guys that I was out on were Treylon Burks and Quentin Johnston. I thought they didn't have the ball skills. I thought they weren't good enough athletes. And I thought there's a ton of things that I thought, but there were guys that were manufactured plays and there were all these things. So I was worried that Adonai Mitchell was going to fall in the same category before I watched his tape. Turn the tape on, and I'm watching, and I'm like, well, we know the testing numbers were off the charts. I mean, he tested like a phenomenal athlete. So that makes me feel pretty good because those other guys in that same archetype didn't test super well. They were okay, but they disappointed in the 40 and blah, 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 blah. So, all right, he tested well. Let's see if that actually shows up because similar to what you mentioned before, there are players that play stronger, play faster, like where the testing numbers and what you see on the field do not match up. Sometimes in a positive way, sometimes in a negative way. But that's kind of what I was waiting to see. Like, okay, how do the testing numbers line up with what I see in Adonai Mitchell? And overall, I came away very impressed. Here's a guy with really good size that was able to sink his hips much better than I thought in his routes, which allowed him to create some separation. When I looked at things like ball tracking, one of the best that he got the highest score in ball tracking in this class for me, and one of the highest scores that I've given over the past few seasons. The guy played the position at times like a center fielder. He was able to really figure out where the ball was, adjust his flight path, and contort his body in a way to always be in the best position to catch the football. And then I saw the speed. Yep, that matches up. Hands, he only had one drop the entire season, and he was able to go up, do contested catch type things, and was strong at the catch point. So I walked away from his tape saying, holy crap, the ceiling for this guy is bonkers ceiling. But I also know that the floor is very, very real. So D-Bro, for somebody that didn't have him nearly as high as I did, what are the concerns?
So with Adonai Mitchell, I don't know if he's going to be a high-end target earner in the NFL. Like you talked about the Z receiver aspect and the target share aspect for a receiver when we're talking about Troy Franklin. I have some of those similar concerns with Adonai Mitchell. And what does he play? Does he play Z? Does he play X? Are they asking... Because at Texas, he was asked to stretch the field a ton. And this is not to say he can win versus off coverage. I thought he was actually fantastic versus off coverage. My worry for him is when corners can kind of get into his body, and he lets that happen pretty regularly when he does get... I mean, because there's not a lot of teams in college, like, this, Garret, like, not a lot of teams, collegiate teams, are playing press man. They don't have their guys. It's a ton of off coverage. But when you play against... I'll notice a few reps, specifically from Auburn. Alabama, and he did have a really, really good game. But there's a lot of context to that game as well. But there are reps where you see corners get into his body and they get him at the catch point. And the hands overall, the point about drops, he's got solid hands overall. But when guys get into his kitchen, you can see some problems with Adonai's, at least how he attacks the ball at the catch point, because the drops are not a problem, but in contested situations, he still only had a 43.3 contested catch rate in college. In his final season, that was 36.4%, and some of that lines up with going back to the measurables. His testing was fantastic. The only thing I'll point out on his profile is that his hands are small. He had 21st percentile 9-inch hands. So good catching technique, But I think that the hand size does show up a little bit when he gets somebody into his kitchen and he has to deal with physicality at the catch point. The issues, or at least my worries about Adonai Mitchell, are the speed is definitely there. I saw, at least like when he was not necessarily running, because he didn't run a lot of like stop routes, hitch routes, like where he's having to sink his hips. A lot of it was a lot of slants, a lot of in-breaking routes, or they were asking him to kind of round off and just run to space versus zone, which he could do. I saw a little bit more inconsistency when I watched this film on sinking his hips and being consistent with that. Now, again, part of that just straight up goes back to coaching. And if he shows that he can do it at all on his film, there is definite upside that he can do it more consistently and do it better depending off coaching. And especially if we're talking about transition to the NFL, can he improve that? I do think that he can. But looking at some of the stuff we're either talking about at the catch point or just his ability after with the ball in his hands, he's not a tackle breaker guy. Like, he won't force many missed tackles. He has 9 total in college. He's not a twitchy guy after the catch for his size and where he tests. And I think it's a fantastic point that you brought up, the testing matching to the film. There's a lot of guys where I can point back to and say, look, the testing was fantastic, but I didn't really see it on their collegiate film. One of the guys especially, and it's a very, I'm not going to say it's a similar archetype because there are very big differences in their play styles, but a guy that tested fantastically in college, and some of the numbers were there, but we did not see him put it together until this last season, was Nico Collins. He looked like he was going to be a monster coming out, and then we're seeing, okay, well, is he just not? And then we find out, okay, a lot of that's quarterback play. A lot of that is he did need to make some strides in the NFL as far as adding other tools to the tool bag. And so can Adonai Mitchell do that in the NFL? I think it's very possible, but some of the concerns that I have with his film, and then you marry all of this, and you talked about the analytics profile, it's bad, man. Like, we're talking about a player that, because not only the per route efficiency, can we give him, or at least try to conjure up like giving him a hall pass on it because he played with Xavier Worthy? You can to a certain extent, but then also we also have to bring up the fact he never garnered over an 18% target share in any collegiate season. He never produced over 1.7 yards per route run in any collegiate season. Last year's numbers, he was, out of all FBS wide receivers, at least 50 targets, he was 179th in yards per route run. He was 98th in receiving grade, and he was 260th in yak per reception. So the numbers are frightening. Like, they're nightmare fuel. But again, you and I mentioned this before we even turned the mics on. We're both not fans of Quinn Ewers, okay? You can pick apart both Adonai's tape and Xavier Worthy's tape and say, oh, man, if they just had a quarterback that could hit them on a deep ball, like in stride, both of them would have had much better numbers. It is deplorable how often on both of their film where they are having to just whip corners and get 5 yards of separation, because when the deep ball comes, baby, they're stuck going, instead of I'm speeding up, I'm not slowing down, you hit me in stride, we're basket catching and we're waltzing into the end zone, or we're breaking at 50 to 70 yards. It's you're having to slow down in your route and wait for the ball, and then what could have been a 70-yarder becomes a 30-yarder. What could have been a 50-yarder becomes a 25-yarder. Like, those things are very, very real. And it's context that we have to bring up with these players, because that alone impacts widely what both of their numbers could have been in college. So again, giving context with film to a worrisome analytical profile. It's like, if you would have put him, let's throw it this way. Garrett, if you would have put Adonai Mitchell on LSU and you would have flipped him with Brian Thomas Jr., I can make you a damn good case that maybe he doesn't go out and he puts up Brian Thomas Jr. type of numbers at LSU. It might not have been that different, though, man. Like, looking at the caliber of deep ball passer that Jaden Daniels is versus Quinn Ewers, those two profiles could have been very, very different, and the conversations could have been very different.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, even going back to his Georgia days, you look at the guys that he played with. George Pickens, he
Yep.
played with him as a true freshman. You had Brock Bowers, Lad McConkey. So a lot of first and second
Jermaine
round type
Burton
of.
too, I think, right?
Yeah, Jermaine Burton would have been there as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and now with
Yep.
Alabama. So yeah, a lot of really talented receivers. And I can't get around, and that's the biggest thing for me. I can't get around the production profile. It is not good, and that's tough. But if he's able to check the film grade for me, he's able to check the combine, and he's able to check the NFL draft capital. 3 of 4 ain't bad. 3 out of 4 ain't bad.
Yep.
So it's how much you buy into that. The one last thing I will say, he did seem to have a knack for finding the end zone. For all of the things he did poorly, he had almost half of Texas's receiving touchdowns this past year. He had 11 receiving touchdowns. The team as a whole had only 25 passing touchdowns. So he was approaching half of what they produced. And every big game, even as a true freshman, every game that was in the bowl series, he had a touchdown in every single game. So 5 for 5 every game. So when the team needed a big play, he was there. He was available. He was able to make it. The one thing that I'm surprised you didn't bring up, and I'm flipping the script and telling on myself a little bit. The one thing that he didn't bring up that is still another concern for me is, as much as I loved his film, and I loved it, there are times where the dude is loafing. I mean, he's loafing at times. And they talked about that. Xavier Worthy did some of the same thing. It was a Texas thing. They allowed their players to do that. But there were also times where he did seem like he was just a little aloof out there. Like, what's going on this play? And sometimes you'd even see it in the middle of his route. Like, he'd be loafing, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, crap, they're throwing me the ball. And then he would make an acrobatic catch, and you're like, oh, wow, okay, good thing you're a fantastic athlete, because most guys can't get away with that. So that is the other, like, little small thing that I'll say. So as much as I love Adonai, and as much as I do feel like his upside, his tape is significantly better than everyone in this class not named Harrison, Odunze, or Neighbors, I'm still terrified. I'm still terrified.
Yeah.
I need to see I really need the NFL to tell me, are they concerned with the profile?
Mm-hmm.
Are they concerned with the lack of effort at times, or do they see an elite wide receiver that has crazy upside, the size, the speed, all of the things that they want, and still being able to maneuver like a wide receiver one? That's what I need them to tell me, and we won't find out till Thursday.
Yep, and we're going to find out, man. And I still think the one thing I'll say about it, and going back to like just not digging your heels in on your process, but feeling like very good about your processes. I think regardless of where he gets drafted, I think his draft capital is going to be very similar. I think maybe we're splitting hairs on, is it in the late 20s in the first round to the top end of the second round? And if that's the case, to me, whatever. Like, I'll throw the draft capital out the window a little bit and just be like, look, like, I'm going to go back to my process. I'm going to lean on where I am. And again, looking at this class just from a macro view, it's going to be one of those classes where we all go back to the drawing board and we say, how can we tinker with our process? What did I miss? Because look, you brought up Quentin Johnston at the very beginning of this show. Look, I learned a lot last process about Quentin Johnston. Like, I was not in on him, or at least I was very lukewarm whenever about Quentin Johnston. And in the last process, looking at his tape, looking at his film, I was lukewarm on him. And whenever he landed with the Chargers, I'm not going to say I got over my skis, but I was very, very hyped about
Great landing spot.
his usage basically with the Chargers and Kellen Moore, and covering up some of the deficiencies in his game to where I was like, oh, this is a fantastic landing spot. They're going to make the best use of like what he does well and putting guys in spots. And that goes back to coaching. But again, learning in that process, I went back to it and I'm like, okay, I need to sit here and worry less about landing spot to an extent, because I baked that in too much with Quentin Johnston on a player that maybe I wasn't that high on, But the more I kept kind of percolating about it, I talked myself into it, and I'm like, nah, they're going to use him perfectly. They're going to put him in the right spots. They're going to let him, exploit run after catch. And then we didn't see him run anything but freaking clear outs all year. So again, going back to the process, I think this class is going to be a really good learning point for all of us.
Yeah, and we've all been there. We see guys that we love, and they go, or even that, like you said, that I wasn't high on, but I wasn't not high on the guy, and man, everything else looks good. So yeah, let's jack him up 10 spots, or whatever it is. We've all been there. We've all had those mistakes. I remember my first year. This was my first year doing it, and I like I said, I'd watched tape in college, but I let myself think that I really knew what I was doing. And boy, was I all in on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. Man, I thought that guy was the second coming, and DK Metcalf sucked, but J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, yeah, that's the guy right there. So we've all been there. We've all done it.
I was there with Sky Moore a few processes ago. Yeah. I loved his film. I loved everything about his game, and then
he went to the Chiefs too.
Yeah,
he went to the Chiefs too.
Didn't happen.
Nope.
So
we've been there.
Just learning, man. Learning process. That's all this is.
Absolutely, dude. Well, thank you so much for coming on, doing this show. I think this is going to be a fantastic one for everybody to watch, to look at our process, to look at how we look at these guys, to see what we're seeing in guys like Troy Franklin and Adonai Mitchell, and hopefully pick up little things from there watching. So real quick before you get out of here, remind the people where they can find you on Twitter, what you're doing, and anything else you want to share.
Yeah, man. I mean, look at all the things and stuff, written video, everything's over at Fantasy Pros. Thor Nystrom and myself have launched, we launched this draft cycle, our labor of love, the Fantasy Pros NFL Draft Show. I think we're like 10, 12 episodes deep. Please go check that out. Really, I mean, we've dove through everything. Quarterbacks, running backs. We had our betting preview for the NFL Draft. So if you're looking at betting the draft, please go tune into that. All my positional primers are live at Fantasy Pros, and I'm still adding players to that. So quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. My top 50 big boards are live on the site as well. So I've got player notes on 50 players and rank them for both 1 QB and Superflex drafts. So if you're getting ready for all, because look, Garrett, I mean, right now is the prime time to get ready for Dynasty rookie drafts and stuff. So whether you're reading all of that, you're using the mock draft simulator for Dynasty over at Fantasy Pros, man, it's all the things and stuff, man. I'm just excited because we got less than a week, baby, and we're going to find out where all these players land. It's going to get nuts. We're going to have trades, and it's going to be popping, man. So I'm excited, dude. It's a great time.
I can't wait. I cannot wait. Well, thank you again for coming on, and thank you for watching. We have tons more content coming out over the next few weeks about the draft, about what you should be doing in your rookie drafts. So stay tuned to the Dynasty Nerds YouTube channel. For Garrett Price and the rest of the crew over here at Dynasty Nerds, we'll see you next time.